We're going to go ahead and get started. Bell has rung. So, as is our custom, we're going to start with our memory verse, Matthew 5:5. So let's go ahead and recite that together. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Tonight we're going to talk about dancing, and we're going to look at what the Bible has to say about it. We're going to look at some definitions and kind of try to weed out exactly what's entailed and what God would have us do. Dancing appears and reappears with every generation with some tweaks and modifications. It's extremely popular in our society, but not just our society. It's across all cultures, all generations, especially in its modern and more popular forms, and often involves lots of different people, married people, unmarried people, both genders. It's incorporated into parties and times of celebration. Weddings is a time that a lot of us will encounter dancing. Dances at school as our kids are growing up. We've already encountered this in our elementary school. It's going to continue, we know, for us as the kids get older, and of course we see that. And even some parties in people's houses. Sometimes you will have music playing and people dancing. Modern, newer forms of dances have become increasingly sexualized, often involving suggestive movements between partners. And we've seen this in a rise in dance clubs over the past few decades in this country. And some schools actually make moves to ban such types of dances or types of music at their dances to try to avoid that problem. But they can't police everything. And really nothing has changed. And we've been stressing in this class over and over, we need to prove that our conduct is acceptable. 1 Thessalonians 5:21, we need to test all things and hold fast to what is good. Within that verse, it's implied that we also need to let go of those things that aren't good. And so when we look at these topics, as we've done this quarter, we're trying to weed out what is good and what isn't good, so that we hold on to those things that God wants us to hold on to and let go of those things that he doesn't want us to hold on to, whether we want to continue holding on to them or not. And sometimes that's really the most difficult part. Anytime we're encountering sin is that it's pleasurable, and those are the things that our body wants to do, and our mind is pulling us in the other direction, and we need to be sure that we stay on God's side of that line rather than what our temptations are pulling us in that direction. So when we look at dancing, is dancing something that Christians can participate in? Can a Christian have dancing at their wedding? Should Christian parents allow their children to attend school dances, like homecoming dances or prom? What kind of guidance does the Bible provide about this topic to help us answer some of these questions? And this is extremely important anytime we look at these things, that we do it as objectively as possible, because when we study God's truth, it's that coming from that standpoint that it is in fact truth. So let's start out by looking at Galatians 5. This is the works of the flesh, Galatians 5. And we're going to start with verses, well, we're going to read all of them, 19 through 21. I only have 19 and 21 on the board, but we're going to read through all of them. Galatians 5, beginning in verse 19. Now the works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, dissensions, heresies, envy, murderers, drunkenness, revelries, and the like, of which I tell you beforehand, just as I also told you in times past, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. So when we're looking at this list today, what I want to focus on is this word lewdness. That's in verse 19. This is the Greek word that's used in this verse, and is defined by Vines as denotes excess or licentiousness, the absence of restraint, indecency, and wantonness. Thayer defines it this way: unbridled lust, wanton acts or manners, filthy words, indecent bodily movements, unchaste handling of males and females. And then some versions don't have the word lewdness. they have lasciviousness. And so Webster defines that word this way: filled with or showing sexual desire. So this word lewdness, in my version, the New King James, is anything that excites the lust of the flesh. That may be words, that may be bodily movements, that may be unchaste handling of another person and their body, and it's sinful, regardless of what it is. If it's lewd, it is grouped amongst these works of the flesh that Paul is describing that we need to abstain from. We need to avoid. 2 Corinthians 12, verse 20. Let's flip over there. We know about the context of 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, and that Paul is addressing a number of issues that he's heard about amongst this church, and he's making plans to come and see them and try to straighten out some of these problems. 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 20. For I fear lest when I come I shall not find you such as I wish, and that I shall be found by you such as you do not wish. Lest there be contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, backbitings, whisperings, conceits, tumults. Lest when I come again my God will humble me among you, and I shall mourn for many who have sinned before and have not repented of the uncleanness, fornication, and lewdness which they have practiced. So there's our word again. It's the same Greek word, lewdness, and this word that's up on the board, that Paul is warning them about. He's really concerned that he's going to be finding them engaging in a number of sinful activities that he doesn't want to find them in. And he's going to mourn over them. That's the attitude we should have anytime we encounter sin, whether it's in someone else or it's in us ourselves. We should mourn. Blessed are those who mourn. That was our memory verse last month. In 21, he lists three general areas of conduct. The first one is uncleanness, which is really it's a pretty general term. It encompasses all filthiness of flesh and spirit. It's a general defilement of the person and their soul. Barclay renders it this way: the life is muddied and befouled from wallowing in the world's ways. Think about a pig and how they get down in the mud and they wallow, and they are completely covered in filth when they're done with that. That's what happens when we encounter and engage in sin in the world. It rubs off. It gets on us. We have filthied ourselves. We have wallowed in it. And so that's what he's warning against here. The second term here is fornication, which we've talked extensively about in past lessons. It's every kind of unlawful sexual encounter, whether it's heterosexual or homosexual. And the third term is lewdness. Again, that's the term that we have in the definitions which are on the board before me. Notice the distinction between these terms and the overlap. Is all fornication and lewdness unclean? Yes, absolutely. It defiles the flesh and the body every time. But is all uncleanness fornication and lewdness? No, it's an umbrella term, and fornication and lewdness are under that term, but it is not exclusive to that term. Likewise, fornication is certainly lewd. By this definition that we have on the board, it is indecent bodily movements, it's unchaste handling of another person's body, it's defiling, it's excess, it's licentiousness. It falls into that category. But is all lewdness fornication? No, it's not. Lewdness certainly can lead to fornication, but it doesn't have to be fornication for it to be wrong, for it to be sinful. It is sinful all by itself. Does that make sense? Okay, let's go to Ephesians 4. We're going to pick up in verse 17. Ephesians 4:17. This I say, therefore, and testify in the Lord, that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk, in the futility of their mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart, who, being past feeling, have given themselves over to lewdness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. So those who choose to commit lewd acts are not walking according to the ways of God. They're walking according to the rest of the Gentiles, the rest of the world. They're not walking in God's path. They're behaving in a way that's consistent with the world and not consistent with the way that God wants them to walk. They are acting without understanding of what God's will actually is. They're trying to direct their own steps, but that's futile because it's not up to a man to direct his own steps. Our steps should be directed by God. And so when we are acting in a way that's out of step with him, that's where we are living our lives in vanity. Look at the ending of Galatians 5:21 here. What's the warning? As it is with every sin, if we're engaging in lewdness and we are not repenting and putting those things behind us, we are in danger of not inheriting the kingdom of God. Just like any other sin, doesn't matter what it is. And amongst this list in Galatians, you have murders, you have selfish ambitions, you have hatred, you have lewdness. All of these sins, including lewdness, if we fail to put them out of our lives, will cost us heaven. And so we need to be really, really careful when we're doing that, when we're trying to put those things behind us, that we are truly putting them behind us and not engaging in some activity which may bring them back up into our lives. We need to be mournful when we encounter these sins and cut them out and repent. So, here's the question. Does modern day dancing count as lewdness? Is it licentious? Is it indecent? Does it cause lust towards another person? Does it involve indecent bodily movements or the handling of a body of another person in an unchaste way? So let's look at what the world has to say about that. Because sometimes when we want to engage in activities, we try to justify it in one way or another. The world doesn't have that issue. The world wants to do something, they do something, right? So the Roman orator Cicero, according to New Unger's Bible Dictionary, wrote, "No man who is sober dances unless he is out of his mind, either when alone or in decent society, for dancing is the companion of wanton conviviality and luxury." And I looked up in the Encyclopedia Britannica in their article on dance, and there's some interesting words in there that I'm going to read here. So this next passage comes from that. Dance also plays a number of important social roles in all cultures, notably in matters of celebration, courtship, recreation, and entertainment. Courtship dances, for example, allow the dancer to display their vigor and attractiveness and to engage in socially acceptable physical contact between the sexes. The waltz, a relatively modern example of the courtship dance, was banned at certain times because its flagrant contact between the dancers was considered indecent. Such traditional dances often contain fertile motifs where mimed or even actual motions of sexual intercourse are enacted. The popular teenage dances of the mid-20th century have no set steps. The dancers respond spontaneously to the beat of the musicians. The degree of satisfaction attained by young people twisting or shaking to the blare of amplified music in dance halls is different from the pleasure derived by their elders waltzing, but it is only a difference of age and time. Fundamentally, both age groups are enjoying the pleasure of dancing in their own way. The end product is doubtlessly the same: physical pleasure in the activity of dancing and sexual awareness of a partner, whether embraced or half-consciously observed. So, according to the world's standards, there is definitely a sexual, lustful, by our definitions, lewd component to dancing. And we see this portrayed in movies and TVs and books. Prom night is often portrayed as a dance that leads to the loss of virginity between high school sweethearts. How many movies have their leads and musicals and romances whose eyes are opened to the love that they have for a person that occurs within the context of a dance. It's pretty common. It's a common trope. Common sense would also tell us that dancing is lustful. If we walked into a place or we turned on a movie or a TV show or something and dancing was occurring and it was only between one sex, two females or two males dancing, what would be our automatic assumption about what we're observing? It's a homosexual relationship, right? You wouldn't turn on or walk into a place and see two men over here dancing the waltz and think, that's cool. No, your immediate reaction is that these people are in a relationship together. Why? Because there are sexual overtones to dancing. Common sense says it. The world says it. So when we are thinking about it, are we in agreement with what the world's saying about their own activities? Or are we trying to find a way to justify and engage in these activities too? Does that make sense? Does anybody have comments so far? Mine?
I mean, just saying dancing, this kind of goes back into the gambling lesson too, of like, okay, well, I mean, actually the Bible does say dancing, but the Bible doesn't say gambling, right? So we have to look at,
Yep.
What is the sin behind this? David danced whenever, the ark was being brought back, and there's no evidence, or maybe I'm misquoting or didn't see it, right? But it's like, I don't think there's any doubt that there's no sexual component to that, whatever. It's a cheer of happiness and all that. That's not what we're talking about.
No.
We're using the same word, and you can use any other word, just but what we're talking about is of a sexual nature, or what makes it wrong is the sexual nature. It's completely fine to do that with your spouse. I would, I want to still make fun of it, but that's okay. So it's not that dancing inherently is sinful. It's what is behind that word dancing that we're talking about.
Right. We're going to talk about both of those cases later in the lesson, both of those examples. But you're right. The dancing we're talking about is the modern day dance, right? Most of the times we're not talking about the joyful jumping up and down style of dancing, or the dancing between two spouses, although I think we will talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, you're right. Thank you for the clarification. Anybody else? Did I see another hand over here?
I might be wrong on that, but my thinking on that was for David, one of those wars and all this stuff that's out there. And my thinking, David was naked in a lot of those dances. And any woman that's seen him, that had created sin. God may not have made it clear to us with some of this, but it had to be said.
Okay, so while you brought that up, let's go ahead and go to that passage. And I want to go to 1 Chronicles 15. So the first passage, the reading of that in 2 Samuel says that he wore a linen ephod, which was like an apron, right? And so according to that passage, I would have the same reaction. He's just dancing around in an apron, like that's not okay. 2 Chronicles, and this is just the way I read it, so I'd be curious how other people see this too. 1 Chronicles 15, verse 27. Second Chronicles. Nope. 1 Chronicles. I'm in 2 Chronicles. I mean to be in 1 Chronicles. 15:27. David was clothed with a robe of fine linen, as were all the Levites who bore the ark and the singers, and the Chenaniah, the music masters, with the singers. David also wore a linen ephod. Thus all Israel brought up the ark of the covenant with the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the horn, with trumpets and with cymbals, making music with stringed instruments and harps. So my interpretation of this, until I sat down and looked at this week, was that yes, David was mostly naked or all the way naked, and that's why Michal was upset. When I read this passage, I see he's clothed with a linen ephod over that, and then Michal, Verse 29, looked out the window, saw David whirling and playing music, and she despised him in her heart. So my reaction to this version of the passage is that David was dancing fully clothed, and Michal, through a heart issue, looked out and hated him because of what she saw in him. Does anybody have a different reading of this? Because this was a passage that I have struggled with too in the last week.
I would think that, just reading this here, 1 Chronicles 15, 28 and 29, it'd be hard to say that it was naked. Would be hard. And with all of Israel doing this, it says that he was clothed with a robe of fine linen. Now, I guess maybe the question could be, all right, did it cover everything? But, having the ark there, that's my first thought, looking at this.
Yeah, he's dressed in the same way that all the other Levites are. So if David is indecent in his dress, then so are all the other Levites. Does anybody have other thoughts on this passage?
Didn't make his wife happy anyway.
Didn't make his wife happy, right. And if the wife's not happy, maybe you're doing something wrong anyway.
What happened to her?
Yeah, she got put away. Yeah. Matthew.
In the Samuel passage, at least my version, it says how the king of Israel, Michael's complaint is how the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, disrobing in the sight of slave girls. So it sounds like there she's complaining about his dress.
Mm-hmm.
My interpretation is that maybe that it's more of the linen robe is like an undergarment, and that they often wore 2 layers. And the Levites were specifically instructed, or the priests were specifically instructed to wear linen undergarments when they went up on the altar, went up to the altar. So that was in my interpretation. He's still somewhat dressed. He's not naked.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree that Michael seems to be in the wrong and that she has any children.
If we take the Bible and we define it from our point of view, and we're going to define all dancing as lewdness, nakedness, illicit, all, and that's the only way we're going to define the word, we're going to skewer the passage. There's dancing that takes place, like on the football field when someone makes the touchdown and they're up there doing the jig. That's a dance, but it's sure not a lewdness and a nakedness. Typically, jumping around. Someone might say they do some lewd acts. Now that's different. But see, that's the thing. It's the view that we're putting on that. You take the person that is out in the fishing boat and he's fully dressed in the middle of winter time, and he catches this big old fish, and he's going to be doing some jumping around. But that dance or that jig or whatever is not a lewd type of action. It could be a lewd action if he's that much of an idiot. But see, that's the thing. If we view it from a personal point of view or a personal definition or maybe a general definition, we're going to make it say something that the Bible is not saying.
Right. We got to let the Bible define what's happening to itself. Right. Good. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about some of these justifications that people use to justify the modern day dancing that we've been talking about. So the lewd dancing between partners that's creating these lustful thoughts. So let me go back to where I was. Okay, so how might you address the following justifications if you heard them said to you? Dancing may cause other people to lust, but I don't react that way. If you heard someone say that, trying to say, oh, I want to go to prom or whatever, how would you address that?
Well, I would say I went to prom, and I know what happens at prom 9 out of 10 times. And so, nice try.
Okay, nice try. Not so much. Okay? Ryan?
Can't speak for women, but from the man, I'd say you're lying. So.
Okay. So men are built differently. And so if this is a female that's saying this, they need to take into account to the other person's mind too. Matthew.
Your action may cause others to lust. That doesn't seem like that's something you're doing well.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some admittance in here that your actions could cause someone else to lust. Yeah, good. Stephen.
Christians are called on to be conscious of other people's consciences and areas of liberty. How much more should we be conscious of areas in which we may elicit sin?
Yeah. Yeah. So 1 Corinthians 12 this time, 32 and 33. Give no offense either to the Jews or Greeks or the church of God, just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, that they should be saved. When we're acting in a way that's going to cause someone to stumble, when we willfully act in a way that may lead someone to stumble, we're not following this passage. We're being unloving. You skip down a few chapters, 1 Corinthians 13:5. Love doesn't seek its own. And really what this justification is doing is seeking its own. It's wanting to do something that may cause a problem with someone else, but that's their problem, not my problem. Right? 1 John 4 and 5, we know that if we're going to love God, we also have to love one another too. Those two things can't be separated. And part of that loving someone else means also being mindful of them and not leading them on a path that's going to cause them to do something or think something that they shouldn't. And that those sinful acts, we need to try to avoid them thinking. Matthew 18:6-7. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Woe to the world because of offenses. For offenses must come, but woe to that man by whom the offense comes. So there are going to be temptations out there, period. We all know that. Sin is going to come. We all know that too. But we don't need to be the one out there throwing it out for people to get tripped up on. And if I have this attitude here where I'm going to, and it doesn't just have to be dancing, right? We also talked about this same example in immodesty too. If I'm going to be doing anything, dancing, immodesty, doesn't matter, that's going to lead someone to follow after my example and cause them to sin, I'm the one who's at fault too. They're guilty for sinning. I am guilty for tempting them to sin. Anybody else have anything else on this one? Okay. How about this one? I can't control what other people think.
It's a cop-out.
Yeah. In what way?
Yes, it is true. You cannot control what other people think. But would the best place to take someone who's an alcoholic to a bar? I mean, why put that, like we already talked about, a stumbling block? Why put that potential? I mean, anyone who's ever been around lots of teenagers or been a public school teacher of middle school students who are a walking hormone, I mean, it's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Yeah. If we're going to let our light shine before men, our light needs to shine. It can't be obscured, and it can't, having this attitude would obscure it. Because what you're saying is, I'm not going to do what I can to lead someone. I don't care what that person thinks or does. It's about me. And that shouldn't be the Christian mindset. So, to Ryan's point, this is the point. These last two examples are the ones where I struggle, and this may just be my personal application, with people who are married dancing together in public. So if I'm going to a wedding, and Audrey and I have attended weddings of numerous co-workers, and they all have dancing at weddings, would it be sinful for Audrey and I to dance together? No, not in and of itself. But if my example causes someone else who's not married to go dance with someone else and creates lustful attitudes, is my example a problem? Yes. And so that's where I have that struggle. And so that may just be a personal application to me. In the privacy of my home, would it be different when there's no one else? Yes, absolutely. Where no one else is around? Sure. But in public, that's when you're starting to get closer to that line. How close do you want to get?
Yeah, this is challenging. I got a text message today from a friend, and this couple, they're both Christians, and they're learning, taking in a group session. The next time it's going to be private. Different dances: East Coast swing, West Coast swing, tango, foxtrot, ballroom dancing, and my mind goes to, okay, that sounds okay. It's a husband and wife. They're doing a private group. Maybe there's one other couple there. I think this is a struggle at times. I can remember when I was in Denver one time, somebody from the congregation took Nikki and I out. And we were going to go to a restaurant, but there was a bar in the restaurant. So they said, no, we don't feel comfortable. So I said, okay. So we went to another restaurant. But it was pretty much like the same scenario. Maybe it was just like it wasn't right in front of us, but there's still alcohol being served there. Like if you go to any Applebee's or Chili's or whatnot. So I do understand that we are to be considerate and think about other people, but I do think sometimes that is challenging of, okay, well, we were trying to be considerate for this couple. We went to another place which was almost the same thing. Maybe it just wasn't right in front, or maybe our seat wasn't right next to it. So I do think that's something that we have to process and really think about. I do know, I would say, especially with, all of us should be people of influence. That typically most weddings that I've been at, that has been my response as well. But this is, I think sometimes we want this absolute, it has to be exactly like this. And I think that's where the challenge really is.
And there will be times where here's where the line is, and my personal application may be over here. And that's okay. It's my personal application. I'm not crossing the line, but I'm going to live in this territory because it's safer. It doesn't necessarily apply to everybody. And so there may be times like that. Take the alcohol, for example, where some people choose not to go any place where they serve alcohol. Some people don't want to sit at the bar or in the area of the bar. And that's their personal application too. And so this point on dancing with your spouse in public, that may also be a personal application too. Right? Wayne?
Something that's always creeping out, and maybe not everyone feels this way, but sometimes around Valentine's and other special occasions, you see these father-daughter dances. And I don't know, there's something about that concept that just creeps me out. I think it's wrong in so many different ways. So maybe we can elaborate on that.
Yeah, sure. It's taking that, it's the same types of dances that we're talking about it, but it's putting a different type of partner together. Does that eliminate some of those attitudes around it? I mean, is it a 3-year-old kid we're talking about? Is it your teenage daughter? Like, there's a lot of lines there that we shouldn't even start to try to jump over. Yeah. Anybody else? Heather?
As a girl, kind of growing up, maybe some things are okay when you're younger, and then all of a sudden as a girl, you reach this age where, now things are awkward, and you feel awkward and things are different. You're starting to mature a little bit, and that's kind of my idea about that father-daughter dance idea. Is it's confusing, I think, because maybe it was fine
we also need to be consistent when we're raising our kids, right? And so if we're saying, yes, you can do this when you're 5, but you can't do this when you're 15, there's an inconsistency there that's going to be confusing to them. Okay, what about this one? How can anything wrong happen when the dance, talking about school dances specifically here, is so closely supervised?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. Stephen?
If you're supervising the unchaste bodily movements, and they're going on, it's already happening.
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about the modern dance,
That's what we're talking about.
it's not about it being supervised to limit it from progressing. It's what they're already doing.
Right, right. You really, that's what they're trying to do, is they're trying to get it not to turn into something else. But the action itself is still occurring. Additionally, they can supervise what's going on the outside, but they can't supervise what's going on the inside, right? 1 Corinthians 2:11, for what man knows the thing of a man except for the spirit of the man which is inside him? You can't control what's happening inside the mind of those teenagers. You can try. Good luck. It's not going to happen, right? And so chaperones can only inhibit what they see, but they can't inhibit what's going on inside. They can inhibit what happens after the dance. They can inhibit what they're not seeing, right? You're talking about a handful of people and hundreds of teenagers. You're not going to see everything. You're not going to see what's happening on the way home, for sure. And so you're just leading to one next thing.
And not only in that environment, but here's two people, and it kind of goes back to the last question. Here's one person that's, he or she's got the attitude that I'm wanting more out of this. This other person's supposedly turned off or whatever. But what happens with this person looking for the next event or the next time, or how to progress this along? Or is the person sitting on the side saying, well, I kind of like that, I'd like to participate in that and take that to another level? It's a chain reaction.
Right. And I like that you bring up, it's not just the people dancing, it's people watching too. Yeah, remember, one of those definitions of lewdness is not just the action. There's also words and thoughts that go into that too. Okay. Dancing is good exercise. Find something else to do.
Well, I mean, you're right. It is good exercise. So all the guys come to my house, and all the girls. But it shows the intellectual dishonesty about that.
Yeah.
I mean, running from the police is exercise. I mean, come on, it's just not a good justification, you know.
Right. At this point, you're grasping at straws. I actually looked at, because I was curious, there's a metabolic equivalent score that's attached to different activities to determine like how good it is exercise compared to something else. This one rates about a 4.8 to 5. It's about the same as mowing your yard. Like, it's not that good. And how much are you really doing to be qualified as regular exercise, right? Okay, so the last really big one that you see, and we've talked a little bit about it, is dancing is in the Bible. So let's look at what dancing is in the Bible. Let the Bible define dancing and see if it matches up to the dancing we're actually talking about or not. So Exodus 15, 20 and 21. Exodus 15, 20 and 21. Then Miriam, the priestess, the sister of Aaron, took the timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrel and with dances. And Miriam answered them, and then she had this chant that she said afterwards. Is this the dancing we're talking about? First of all, who's dancing? The women. Women only, right? What was their purpose in dancing? Yeah, they escaped through the Red Sea. They're praising God. This is part of their worship, their pre-law of Moses worship that they were doing here. Does this justify the dancing we have been talking about? Is this the same thing? No. No, it's not. Eric?
We don't know how far they actually went. Maybe they were way outside where nobody else could see them, just praising the Lord.
Yeah. Okay, so Yeah, you're right. We don't have all the details of what it looked like. No, we have no idea, but we know what it tells us, right? And so it certainly doesn't justify dancing. We know that dancing, while it was part of their worship at the time, it's certainly not part of ours. You don't find it anywhere within the New Testament that we should be doing. And so this is not the same thing. Let's go to 1 Samuel 18:6. This is a very similar passage. Now it happened when they were coming home. This is after David killed Goliath. When they came home, when David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with joy and with musical instruments. So the women sang as they danced and said, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. So who's dancing here?
The women.
The women. Why?
We're coming to meet out meeting King Saul.
Yeah. Yes. It's a celebration of joy, right? It's not for the same purposes. It's not the same type of dance we've been talking about. In fact, what I read was that leading up to this, in one of the Bible dictionaries, that the mode of dance, while we don't have a lot of details of what's going on, what is clear is that men and women generally did not dance together at this time. And that there's no real evidence that they ever did during this time period. Social amusement was hardly a major purpose of dancing, and the modern method of dance by couples didn't really start to emerge until the 12th century AD. So the dancing we're seeing in the Bible never lines up with what we are discussing in this class, this modern dance between two individuals that's creating these lewd, lustful thoughts. It's not being described in the Bible that we're talking about. Job, yes?
Today, it doesn't praise God.
Doesn't praise God, right. The dances today don't use his creation of the bodies in a proper way, in a chaste way, and in a holy way for sure. And anytime we don't treat his creation holy, we're not respecting what he has given us and created for us. Yeah. Job 21. Job 21 and verse 11. They send forth their little ones with a flock, and their children dance. What's being described here? Who's dancing? Little children. They're playing. They're going out and they're playing. Have you ever tried to stop a toddler from running around and jumping and down in happiness and doing little jigs? They're just playing. That's what we're talking about here. It's not the same thing. In fact, the closest thing we can come to in the Bible to references what we've been talking about is in Matthew 14. This is the story. We're not going to read it because we're out of time. This is the story of Herod's stepdaughter, who dances in a way that makes him excited and happy, and he promises her anything she wants up to half her kingdom. And she asks for the head of John the Baptist. Is that exactly what we're talking about? No. But was the reactions the same? Was the dance of the daughter wrong in the way that it excited Herod? Yes. Was the reaction of what she wanted for that and his rash promise sinful as well? Yes. There's lots going on wrong in that story. Okay, so it's just another example of it doesn't have to be exactly the same thing that we've been talking about, but these movements can be used in a way that can create sin within a person who's not even engaged in them, who's just watching. Any last comment? We're pretty much out of time. Okay, thank you all for your comments. It's a good conversation today. Next week, we will be lesson 13 on partiality.